Well, hello there, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of the Nordic Football Podcast. It's been a really busy time recently. We've had the transfer window, we've had the international break, and I think it's probably been 2 or 3 weeks since we last had an episode, but we're back now. Real crunch stage of the season into this autumnal section of games coming soon. My name's Steve Wiss, and I'm joined by Jonathan Faduba. How are you doing, John?
Hi, Steve. Hi, everyone. Hope you're doing well. Yeah, international break, of course, as always. So we took a few weeks off and observed the action. Not too much going on for Sweden during that international break. It was a bit of a disappointing international break for them on the national level. But in terms of our teams, our clubs, it was a nice little break for them. And we've just had the first round back as we get to the crunch time, Steve, of this season. And as you said there, summer's over, the winter leaves. Well, the autumn leaves are starting to sort of fall. A couple of life changes going on at the moment, which we may delve into at another point, but we keep on rolling forward, don't we, Steve?
We certainly do, Jonathan. And yeah, you're right. This is the kind of, well, it's not the final hurdle, but we're kind of down the home stretch now in both Allsvenskan and Eliteserien. So we're going to be talking about both leagues, top and bottom of the table. Also, a bit of European talk because we've been given the dream Europa League group involving both Molde and Häcken. That was a really nice little thing that UEFA tossed up there for us. But we are going to start in Norway this week because there's been quite a lot of happening since the last episode. There's been, and you know me, I'm not the sort of person who actually generally likes to talk about transfers too much. But right at the start, at the top of the itinerary here, I feel like certain moves have to be talked about because it could impact the title race as well, Jonathan. So, yeah, you know it's serious stuff when I'm putting it at the top of the itinerary.
Yeah, there's certain subjects that you do like to sort of swerve every now and then, one of them being Tromsø as well. So I'm amazed at the most recent Scout blog we've had. But we'll talk about that a bit later in the show. And one of the other ones is, of course, transfers. But yeah, as you said there, it can't be avoided. And a lot of these transfers could really genuinely determine the title race, can't they, Steve, in Norway? And
Yes.
that's one of the benefits of this season, actually, in Norway. It's looking pretty tasty. We've got a lot of things to play for. So we're going to start there this week, as you just mentioned there, Steve. So you're going to take the floor in section 1. And, of course, then we'll move on in section 2 to Sweden and cover that briefly. But, yeah, let's just look at the most recent round of fixtures because, obviously, as we mentioned, you know, there's only been 2 rounds of fixtures in September. 3rd of September, of course, which we sort of delved into. Highlights being Tromsø beating Rosenborg 3-1. For those who might not remember where we were last time, just a quick recap. HamKam 4, Bodø/Glimt 4 was another amazing result. But in the most recent round of games, obviously just gone Saturday, 16th of September, with Haugesund 0, Viking 2. Incredible story of Viking. Molde 4, Odd 1. Sandefjord 2, Strømsgodset 0. Then we had the big game, Rosenborg-Glimt ended 1-0 draw on Sunday. And then we had Sarpsborg 3, Lillestrøm 1. Stabaek 0, Brann 1. Tromsø 2, HamKam 1. A great result for Tromsø. And have Vålerenga 3, Arlesen 1. But as you've mentioned there, Steve, the things that you want, you want to talk about the end of the window, which is something we didn't quite get to delve on the last show. And as you say, there's been a lot of changes. So listen, you take it away. Where do you want to start? I guess what I'll ask you is, and we do actually have a listener question, which I think is probably a good place to start, really. And it's from Big Sig, our good friend Big Sig. And he says, I asked at the beginning of the window, so I will. Why not ask again now that it's closed? What is the most significant transfer into and out of each league in this past window, Steve? So take it away from there. You don't need to maybe give the answer right now, but just have that in the back of your mind. Where do you want to start with this transfer section? What's caught your eye?
It's a good question from Big Sig, and I think there's different types of significance. There's like the league as a whole, and then you're looking at sort of big money deals, and also significance in terms of determining gold medals. So I will think about that, but I think we'll start with. We'll have to start with Molde because I think they've had the biggest upheaval both in and out of this window. I didn't see it coming, to be honest. It often is the way in Norway. I didn't think they would be losing a couple of the players I'm going to talk about in this particular window. But you're right. There's been across the board, really. Obviously, some clubs haven't been as affected so much, but it's been. You look at this window, and it's almost like half the deals that have been going on in the winter, which is absurd, really. It never used to be like this. Deadline day, I couldn't keep up, John. Like around the whole world, everywhere, I was just completely snowed under. A week later, I was updating spreadsheets, looking at teams, and I was like, "Where the hell did you come from?" Oh, he went there. It's like I just could not keep up. It's crazy stuff now.
I mean, according to Transfermarkt, there were 73 departures and 81 arrivals, and that's just in the summer period in Norway, with an income of 22 million euros total. Average income per club 1.3 million, nearly 1.4 million, which is quite interesting, really, when you think about it. And total expenditure out 13 million. So, Steve, we actually got a net spend here, a high net spend in terms of ins and outs. Clubs are actually spending money, Steve, and I know that includes some of these include deals maybe that have already been agreed. So I don't know to be honest, I don't know the actual full accuracy of this because Transfermarkt can be a little bit weird in how it denominates like winter and summer, how it actually divides them up. Because I can see some transfers here that actually, to me, I think they were winter transfers, but I don't.
Well, the actual here's the figures, right?
They do it by kind of European summer, and I don't think they, it's the reverse, isn't it, in Scandinavia? But anyway, let's look at some of the key transfers that you want to talk about.
Yes. So I think officially on Transfermarkt, the 23-24 summer period, 95 departures, 90 arrivals, income nearly 50 million euros for the league, which is incredible, and expenditure just 10 million euros. So it's a selling league this summer, but there's some serious cash that has come in. So Molde have had an income of nearly 10 million euros this summer. They've sold Sivert Mangsvert's the big one to Ajax. Ajax were really busy late on in the window. They also, I know they signed the Met striker, the Georgian Makatidze, but Sivert Mangsvert for 6 million. That was a big loss for Molde. I thought that he would hang on there until certainly the winter. Ola Brynhildsen as well went on his bike to FC Midtjylland just for 2.5 million euros. That looks a really good buy. But they also lost the likes of Berk Rieser, that was a bit of an under the radar loss. Tiedemann Hansen went on loan to Sweden to AIK. Erik Andersen to Stroms Godset. So Molde lost a bit of their squad depth. They've gained a few players as well, who I'll talk about. But Sivert Mangsvert really does stand out to me as a big loss, really, because he's been one of the. Last year he was probably the best midfielder in the whole league. He's such a solid player, and huge loss for Molde. They brought in Ulrik Hestad back at the club again, and he already looks like a nice piece of business. Free transfer. Fredrik Gulbrandsen, another former player from the Turkish league. I used to really rate him, and they signed Tromsø defender Kasper Oivan for 1 million. And final addition for them, someone called Christian Kappis on loan from Brøndby. I've never come across him before, American player, but so many outs, especially for Molde this window, which is interesting. They're obviously in the Europa League group stage, which we're going to talk about soon. They're 8 points off the top of the table. They'll want to finish in a medal spot and do well in these groups, so it's a massive last third of the season for them.
Which teams would you say have been most affected by the transfer window? Because you mentioned the Molde maybe the most in terms of maybe surprise transfers. Are there any teams that you would say have been really massively hampered by it? And which teams have been really maybe boosted by it?
Well, I said in the last show, I wanted to see Viking really go all out for the title, right? And they've not let me down. They've actually, crucially for Viking, they've not lost anyone of significant importance. And they've added some players. Joe Bell has come back to the club. He was brilliant for them last season, of course. They're signing from Brøndby for 600,000 euros. They've brought in a Ranheim defender called Sondre Longas, who's already scored a goal for them. €250,000 there. Samuel Adegbenro on loan from the Chinese league. Now, the last time he was seen in Scandinavia, he was tearing up, wasn't he, for Norrköping? reliable player, a big game player as well. So I'm really pleased for them that they've brought in 3 players in different areas of the field. And most importantly, they've not really lost anyone of significance that you would say weakens them. And that was the big problem for Viking last year. They lost players of serious importance in this window. And I think they've learned their lesson. And yeah, I think it's fair to say they've backed the manager and they are going all out for this title. So I think that they are a major beneficiary in this transfer window. If you look at their rivals, Tromsø haven't really added anyone, but they've lost a couple of players. Glimt, of course, did lose Hugo Vettelson, which, I think since he's left, they haven't been quite the same, really. So, yeah, it's one of those. I think Viking is certainly at the moment the team that have been really beneficial in terms of a side that perhaps have lost out. Lillestrøm, for me. Akor Adams was a major loss, the top scorer in the league. They got good money for him. They've also lost Vettel Dragsnes to Charleroi in Belgium, and it's only $250,000 sale, but I think he was quite an important player for them. Can play left wing back, centre back on the left, and he's impressed me in recent years. So they haven't really replaced Akor Adams at all. They've still got, obviously, Lennart Olsen up front, which is a great striker. But I think it's going to be a long-term project for them to replace someone of Akor Adams' quality. They have brought in Sam Rogers at the back and someone called Frederick Ellekar, a left-back from Hobro in Denmark, and a couple of other players. Matisse Bolly's come in. The last time he was in the league, I never rated him really much. He doesn't finish enough of his chances. Former Molde and Stabaek player. So I think Lillestrøm have definitely been weakened in this window, to answer your original question.
Yeah, and just looking at the result this weekend as well, maybe that impacted Lillestrøm. They lost 3-1 at Sarpsborg. A new signing actually did score, didn't they? Klosi Thompson off the bench. He's come from, I think, is it Toronto FC on loan. And I noticed also that Salzburg's sort of Swedish invasion continues. They had a player on loan. They've got a player from Häcken, Franklin Uchenna-Tebo, who, funnily enough, he played against Aberdeen in that famous win for Häcken, which turned out to be the last game for one of their key men, who we might talk about in a minute. But yeah, got on Uchenna-Tebo. That was his last ever game for the club, and they actually announced his departure straight after the final whistle. So I don't know if I don't know if the deal was already done when he played, but he had a bit of a mare in that game as well. And
they've been very, very active, Sarpsborg. You look at the ins and outs there. It looks more like an off-season window, doesn't it? I think it's about 8 in and about 9 out, which is pretty outrageous. They've always been a high turnover club, and that can be a problem. But it looks like they've got a few gems here and there, in this department. One other club I just want to talk about in transfers is Vålerenga. Down there struggling this season. They did have that change of manager a few months ago, but they brought in 2 key players in this window. Elias Hagen from IFK Göteborg and Andre Ilic, a centre forward from one of the Latvian clubs. Both were on the score sheet at the weekend against Arlesund. Both cost nearly €2 million between them. And, already you can probably say that's good money invested. You could say maybe they might buy themselves out of trouble, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, and if you look at the form table at the moment in the league, Brann are actually currently top of the form table in terms of the last 4 matches. They've won 4 straight. But Viking are top of the table for the last 6 matches. They've got a total of 16 points from their last 6 games. And Salzburg are actually up there as well. In the last 4 matches, they've got 9 points, doing fairly well. Viking as well, as I mentioned, a form team. If we sort of move away from transfers now, Rosenborg are one other team I think you briefly touched on, of course, lost Holzer. There's quite a bit of movement there, isn't there, Rosenborg, that could be interesting. But what do you think about the table as it stands if we go to look at the league and sort of discuss what's been happening? Because a hell of a lot of things have been happening. We've got manager changes, we've got a big title race. Maybe let's start with the manager changes, Steve. There's a lot going on in Norway this week, really, isn't there? Just tell us. We've got an American returning to Norway.
Yeah, I mean, the two manager changes recently are definitely down towards the bottom of the table. It's the sixth manager changes. Remember, last year there was no sackings, no changes, no nothing. Sixth change of role this year. At Stabaek, Bob Bradley has taken over. Former Stabaek manager, averaged 1.74 points per game with them. The last time he was with the club in around 2015. So he's got a history here. It just wasn't happening with Lars Bohinen. I think they lost something like 6 or 7 games in a row. So I think it was probably a smart move. Bradley has lost his first game in charge, but only 1-0 at home to Brann, and we can't really hold that against him too. Some really big games coming up soon, and they are, 4 points adrift of safety. And Haugesund, Jostein Grindhaug is no longer their manager. He resigned technically. Looks like he's going to be moving to an advisory role. Sanjeev Manoran is the temporary head coach. I was reading an article earlier about how there's a possible accusation that Grindhaug's been bullied out of the club by certain local media and fans wanting a manager change. He is kind of known as Mr. Haugesund. You know, if you cut one of his veins, Haugesund blood would come out of it. So it's a bit of a shock move. They're not exactly doing terribly, but they are now in the bottom 3. So I think both of these clubs are starting to panic a little bit. And that's what I think. Bradley, it's a really interesting, I think it's a bit of a coup, actually. He's a big reputation, isn't he? He's been doing quite well in the States. I know it didn't work out for him at Toronto, but if anyone can sort of get Stabaek back on track, it might be him. And Haugesund, I did say at the start of the season, I worried for them. And at the moment, I think they may well be the team, along with Allison, who go down. But yeah, it's getting to that time of season now where certain clubs will start to panic.
Yeah, and we've gone from no managerial changes, I believe, last season to, I think that now makes 6 managerial changes, maybe even more if you include caretaker spells.
Yeah.
We got, Arlison changed manager, Wålerenga changed, and then obviously caretaker for Arlison again, Rosenborg, Lillestrøm, Wålerenga, then Lillestrøm obviously with their appointment, Stabaek and Haugesund. So in total, you could say, look, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 changes. What do you put that down to, Steve? Is it just, is it maybe, you mentioned transfer deadline day was crazy as well. Is it Fabrizio Romano? Is it kind of like, are we following the European trend here, the Western European trend now, and sort of big transfers and sackings, and here we go? Is that the new way in Norway? Or is it just a turbulent period, a bit random, kind of just a random season?
Clubs were very patient last year. I think that's what we've got to say. I think you could almost expect issues this year that, look at Fergermo, for example, at Wålerenga. I think they felt like they'd given him long enough, but you then never would have seen Guy Bakker switching from Lillestrøm, for example. Kjetil Rekdal Rosenborg did well last season, and then suddenly he's under huge pressure. So, yeah, I think it's just kind of normal stuff, really. I think last year was the exception, the freak. Clubs have been generally more patient, but it feels like there's a bit more cutthroat, a bit more ruthlessness this year. I don't know maybe why, but I do think the Eliteserien is quite a strong league. I think there's a good standard of football in it this year. I think it's really improving. And maybe when that happens, teams just get a bit more cutting edge and ruthless. It's just a possible theory about it. And perhaps some would say there's maybe been 2 or 3 harsh sackings this year.
Let's have a little focus on Bob Bradley. And a well-traveled man. This is going to be he's managed in 6 different countries now. This is not his first rodeo in Norway, of course. 2014, he was appointed manager of Stabaek, and he's now back. Is this a permanent deal? Is he there for the long term? Is this an interim role? Stabaek, you mentioned earlier. They are bottom of the form table. With their terrible run of 0 points in recent matches. His most recent roles have been Toronto FC. That role ended in 59 games. And averaged, I think, a 23.73 win percentage according to Wikipedia, which isn't amazing, but At Stabaek in his first role, 52.78% win percentage in his 72 games for the club, according to, again, Wikipedia. Give us a bit of an American flavour on Bob Bradley, Steve, for those who are listening. Who is he? What's his track record in Stabaek? You know, what are your thoughts on him? I know you're an opinionated man.
I like him.
Let's hear the Meat Man Soccer take on this manager.
I've always liked him. I like his jibe. He talks a good game. He's to the point. He's a positive manager. He likes to have a go. So that already, you know me. I like a bit of attacking football. I like teams that are a bit chaotic, and he's definitely chaotic. That LAFC team that he was in charge of the first 2 years at LAFC was brilliant. That was some of the best football you'll see in MLS. I absolutely loved it. And wherever he goes, apart from Toronto and Swansea, which was a very short stint, and Toronto are a club I know for a fact that they're been on the downer off the field anyway, so I'm not even going to blame him too much there. But he's someone I followed a lot in his career. At Stabaek to start with, at Le Havre, he was there for a couple of seasons in France. And what you're going to get from him is a much more attacking style, and they need it because they can't score goals. If you look at Stabaek's recent run, the main reason they're losing games is because they can't find the back of a net, John. Unfortunately, in his first match, they still haven't scored. But, they didn't play too badly against Brann. And that is one of the tougher games. They're going to be facing Allsvenskan next. So already that's like a 6-pointer, isn't it? Down at the bottom of the table. But the big thing with Bradley, you wouldn't call him tactically astute. He will, obviously he will have quite a lot of entertainment with his systems. But he's a strong motivational manager who likes to have a good go. And I think that's the thing that I take out of it with Bradley, that he is going to make a difference off the field as well as on it and get these players fired up. So I think if they can't score goals into him, then they might not score many at all.
And just briefly, Steve, before we move on, who would you say has got the better manager? Because obviously, if you look at the league table at the moment, Haugesund are down there as well. I mean, Arlesund are a different matter, which we'll talk about in a minute. But with the appointment of the new manager at Haugesund, I know it's currently, I believe, a caretaker. Is it Sanjeev Manoharan?
Yes.
But who would you, obviously with Lars Bohinen leaving and Jostein Grindhaug leaving, who would you say had to roll the dice more, and who's got the better manager out of Bob Bradley and this current new manager, in your opinion? And also, just Lars Bohinen is quite a big character in Norway. Why hasn't it worked out for him in this role? Because I thought he was quite highly rated.
I think with Lars Bohinen, he's had a collection of failures in his time in the Norwegian Eliteserien, but he's also had some successes as well. He's very hit or miss. I think what Lars Bohinen is he's an impact manager. He came in last year and he got them promoted. I've seen him come into teams before, keep them up. He's especially a very good manager at getting teams out of Obos. And then sometimes it just seems to go flat for him for whatever reason. So, he's very much all or nothing, really, is Lars Bohinen. And Stabaek definitely had to roll the dice. If you look at their results, something had to change. And they've got a decent manager there, I think, who could make a difference. Whether or not he can keep that squad up is a different question entirely. As for Haugesund, I just think when you look at them, I think they've done well to get 20 points, to be honest. I had them down as rock bottom this year. So I think they've kind of overachieved to an extent. I don't think they had to change manager. Grindhaug is moving supposedly to an advisory role. So he's still going to be around the club. And that probably helps them, really. They're quite a close-knit outfit there. Always quite a family sort of feel there to Haugesund. I don't know much about this Sanjeev Manoharan. Will they end up with a more permanent coach? I don't know. It seems a bit of a surprising move. I would have just kept with Grindhaug until the end, although it sounds like he was forced out a bit. He's resigned his position because I think he was feeling the pressure too much from fans and the media. So it's a shame when someone feels like that, but that's the nature of this business, isn't it? Where I think it's hard to criticise what Jostein Grindhaug's done, though. in recent years. The resources here at Haugesund are just not that good. And I feel like he's done a decent job, but I guess he felt it was time just to switch roles.
Switch roles indeed, and that is it. So Bob Bradley in, and a caretaker in at Haugesund. Let's just look a little bit further at some other key games. I mean, see, we have to talk about Viking. They are flying at the moment, and sort of arrived out of nowhere. We've had a few listener questions over the last few weeks about them. That momentum's just been building and building, and as we stand, Steve, with 9 games to go, they're top of the league.
Well, this is the big talking point, isn't it? The Eliteserien title race. Genuine three-way battle. I suppose even the likes of Molde and Brann fans can still dream of potentially winning the title as well, or certainly a medal. Things have really got close. I mean, Viking have won something like 11 of the last 12 games. Bodø Glimt are off the top of the table for the first time this season, I do believe, certainly since the early round. So they've been chased down by this Viking machine. Tromsø are still staying put. They beat HamKam, although they did have that really poor recent defeat against Sarpsborg away. And it's getting to the stage now where I've been looking at the remaining fixtures and I've been crunching the calculator, things like that. You know how it gets, Jonathan. And it's really interesting. You won't be surprised to hear I am ruling Tromsø out of contention. They have 6 of their last 9 matches away from home. And I think they've got a hell of a tough fixture list, to be honest. And,
let's stick to Viking for now. I mean, we can do an overview of the title in a minute. But let's just stick with Viking because, I mean, this is some sensational story, Steve. I mean, even with Glimt, the 2 points above Glimt, where, Glimt have been this sort of unstoppable force. What is actually happening at Viking that sort of propelled them this way? Is it just a bit kind of fluky? Have they sort of found themselves top of the table by chance? I mean, I know in recent episodes you talked about sort of Trippic and you talked about 1 or 2 other factors, but this sort of sustained momentum, it hints at something genuine here, doesn't it?
I think if you look at their underlying numbers, they're quite good. They're a legit top 4 side. And I think what's just happened to them in this run is they've scored goals at crucial times in games. Like there's been 2 or 3 very late wins. The one at Stabaek springs to mind. That was about mid-July. They obviously beat Bodø Glimt 3-2. I think they beat Stabaek late in the home game as well. So it just feels like things have been going their way. Can they keep that up? It's really hard, isn't it? When you've won 11 out of 12, inevitably some sort of drop points will come, perhaps when we least expect it to happen. But Trippic has certainly led the way. He's been inspirational for them in attack. I really like the signings of Salverson and D'Agostino in the forward areas this year. David Brecalo has been one of the best defenders in Eliteserien. And now they've reinforced that midfield by bringing back Joe Bell and added Benro into the attack as well. So they've got options. But the key with Viking now for me is they're in a position they're not used to being. They are top of the table with 9 games to go. Now, I don't know when the last time they won the league. It's a long time ago, probably. It all comes down to the mental state now because obviously Glimt have won titles in recent years. Viking's 2 most important games remaining are Molde away on the 1st of October and then Viking against Tromsø on the 22nd of October. Now, at the start of the season, if you had said to me, I think about round 24 or round 25 game between Viking and Tromsø would be potentially title deciding. I mean, we'd have laughed, wouldn't we? But, I mean, that game looks massive now. But they've got some other favourable fixtures as well. I think there was a question that I think Andy Martin might have asked us it. Are they now the favourites? Are they now in pole position? The bookmakers certainly still make Bodø Glimt the favourites, but I think it's close. I think Viking don't have any European football to play. Those 2 games that I mentioned are the only real standouts on paper that are tough. Now, titles are not won on paper. But it's really close. It's a question of do you believe that they can hold their nerve mentally? I think it comes down to that now because technically on the field, they've been playing some great football. It's just whether they can hold it together in their heads.
Yeah, and as you mentioned there, Andy Martin at FPL Tactician, who, by the way, we have to give a big shout out to because as things currently stand, I believe he
was top of the
he is
fantasy
still top
at
of
one
our
point.
Nordic Football Podcast Fantasy League. He's got an 11-point lead on Fantastic FPL Trini. He only picked up 41 points in the last round, but he is doing very well. And he does ask, are Viking favourites for the title now, or would you still say BG? Now, just looking at Buda Glimt's underlying numbers, Steve, they are still top in expected goals and expected goals against. So statistically, they are still the team to beat. But could you make the case for either side for us?
Yeah, I also want to give a massive shout out to Andy Martin. I think at one stage this summer, he was top of the entire Eliteserien fantasy of anyone playing in the whole game. I think he was top for 1 week. So he's had a great year fantasy-wise. Well done, Andy. What the Buda Glimt have just... I mean, it looked like they were going to run away with the title, didn't it? But they've been pegged back by Viking and Tromsø. One thing I will say for Glimt is 6 of their last 9 games are at home. They've played more away games than any other side. And if you look at the games they've dropped points in, with the exception of probably Hamcam away and Godset away, they just drew against Rosenborg on the road, 1-1. That's not a terrible result, really, when you think about things. It was a full house at Lerkendal. Rosenborg still have quality. You can't really hold that against them too much. So I don't think they've actually done too badly in this run. I mean, they've lost against Tromsø and Viking. Now, that happens. They're up there at the top of the table. They dropped points against Molde. They've not dropped many other points at all. I mean, Brann earlier on in the season. So it might be a case of that they're really strong at home. They probably win all the remaining home games. So they're certainly not out of it, but they do have Europa League games, Conference League matches to play. That can hinder them. I don't think Glimt are the same team they used to be when they have 2 games in a week. They've also got Norwegian Cup semi-finals, potentially a final to come. So they're going to have a hectic schedule. I suppose if a team can do it, it is them. But I think they're going to need a little bit of help, Glimt. If they win the title, I think they're going to need Viking to slip up a few times because I don't think Glimt are going to close the season with 9 straight wins. I'm not even sure they're going to win, 7 out of 9. So I think they're going to need a little bit of help from Viking, but it could get really tense, this battle. And, in my experience, we've not really had this very often, have we, in Norway recently? It's always been one team's been dominant. So it's an unusual title race, and I guess there's a lot of questions that might happen.
Yeah, long way to go. But we have to give a massive shout out to Viking. We're also going to give a massive shout out to Tromsø. I know you might not do that, but I will say thank you also to Andy for the question and for doing so well in fantasy. Tromsø are currently third, 45 points. So, there are 3 teams there with it 3 points for each other, and then Molde 5 points further behind. So, and 8 points off the top Molde. So it's looking maybe Molde really need a good run now if they're gonna be in it. But Steve, let's just get your take there. Is it a 3-horse race? Just in a brief sentence, or do you expect anyone now? I mean, Brann, as I mentioned, the top of the form table. Do you see anything changing, or is it those 3 now?
I think so. And to be fair to Tromsø, they have looked a bit more convincing recently at home, certainly. And there is, I do want to remind people, a Y-Scout blog that we've done on Tromsø. It's quite an interesting read. I'm quite generous towards them in that write-up. But as previously mentioned, I am going to rule them out of the race because I think I'm just looking at their remaining fixtures. It's tough, really tough. They've got 6 out of 9 on the away from home. They've got to travel to Brann, Viking, and Molde. I mean, that's really tough games. So look, if Tromsø were to win the league from here, absolute fair play to them. It would be remarkable considering. And also, they've not got the same clout in the transfer window that the other teams have had around them. So it would be a hell of a story, really. But they're still up there. I mean, they're not out of it at all. They've got more of a chance of winning it than Molde and Brann have. Molde and Brann look like 2 teams that perhaps just finding some real form at perhaps the right time. But Molde have got some tough games as well. They are involved in Europe. So I just think it might be a step too far for Molde. But let's wait and see. There's going to be a few twitchy teams in the next few weeks, Jonathan. Who can take the bull by the horns? It's not a boring title race. Let's just say that. It's very entertaining for the neutral out there. I know there's a lot of listeners who are desperate to see Tromsø win every week just to prove me wrong. Out there, there's Viking fans who know that this might be their one chance to win the league, in the next few years. And it's, as I say, it's very exciting times in Norwegian Eliteserien. I'm not going to sit on the fence. I will give a prediction of my top 3 at the end of the season. I'm going to go Bodø Glimt to win the title. I'm thinking now, though, this is going to be, margins of like 1 or 2 points, by the way. I think it's going to go to the final day of the season. So I'm going to go Viking second. I will go Molde in third and Tromsø fourth.
That's very interesting because that is your preseason predictions change now. You did have Molde to win the title, so you're jumping ship, which is totally fair enough. You had Tromsø in 9th and you have Viking 8th, so both of them are sort of outdoing your expectations, but you've now switched to Glimt to win it. So let's see how that goes. And for those who haven't seen it, good shout out to our partners at Y-Scout. The article is entitled, the entire article is entitled Tromsø IL, the flickering of the northern lights are getting brighter. And you did upset 1 or 2 Bodø Glimt fans there with the title that they've used on the tweet about Tromsø's traditional regional supremacy. But I saw 1 or 2 comments from Glimt fans there on Twitter. You weren't too happy about that particular phrase, but you can never please them all, Steve. So
you can't please them all,
definitely worth a read if you haven't seen it yet. And a nice analysis. And then who's to say that Mr. Meatman Sucker isn't impartial, because he has given a full article's worth of content on Tromsø, who he has spent this year mainly trying to avoid. So fair play to you on that one. Let's move on to the relegation battle now. I mean, we have talked about the 2 teams down the bottom there, but there's one team we haven't spoken about, and it looks like maybe it's getting a bit bleak for them, isn't it, Stephen? Who's that?
Yeah, it's the old West Brom of Norway, Allsvenskan. It's going to be back to the Obos, I think, for them. 11 points now, minus 36 goal difference. They're 11 off safety. They've got the absolute last chances this weekend against Stabaek. They've got to beat them, hands down. Even that's probably not going to be enough. They look like a team that might just have not given up the ghost a bit, but I think they realise that their situation is really bland. Stabaek, obviously, then on 16 points, but they've got a new manager. They've got some favourable fixtures. They've got games in hand. So they're certainly far from down, in my opinion. And then we've got Haugesund on 20, the playoff spot. Sandefjord and Vålerenga on 21. Both of them sides have actually shown improvement recently. Certainly Vålerenga have been grinding away. HamKam on 23. They've had a good mid-season run as well, but equally they could get sucked back into trouble if they're not careful. I think after that, Strømsgodset on 26 have probably got enough points. Not got enough points, but you think they can probably pick up a couple of wins before the end of the season. So I think we're looking at 11th down are the teams that are going to be either going down automatically or in the playoff spot, Jonathan, really.
So by that rationale, you don't think HamKam are safe at present, as they are 23rd? As they are currently 11th with 23 points.
No, they're certainly not safe. They've had a good mid-season run, but if you watch some of their games, they have perhaps been a bit lucky in certain circumstances. The ridiculous 4-4 draw against Glimt. I mean, I could dedicate half an episode to that game. It was absolutely bonkers. Glimt won't really know how the hell they didn't win it. They're mixed in with it. There were some good performances against Rosenborg, but we know that HamKam defence isn't reliable enough. So if they're not careful, and they had a shocking run earlier in the season, I think they lost 8 out of 9 games. They won't want that to happen again. Now, I don't think they will actually end up in the bottom 3, but I think Vålerenga are likely to finish above them just because they've got a far better squad. Sandefjord, though, and Haugesund don't inspire me too much in terms of overall quality. So I think HamKam will finish above both of those 2, which would put them in safety But they could still get sucked into trouble. I suppose Godset, if they're not careful, could as well. But it's going to take a pretty poor run of like sort of 5 games in a row defeats to get them in some trouble. At this point in time, I would say Arlesund, if I had to do a prediction, Arlesund bottom. I think Haugesund will finish second bottom. And the playoff spot, I think, would be between Sandefjord and Stabaek. And it's a toss-up, really, either way there. I suppose you got to say probably Stabaek because at the moment they've got a big deficit. But if Bradley gets some motoring, don't rule out that Stabaek side for automatic survival.
So having said all that, on the positive side, you do think that Rosenborg are now safe?
Yeah, I mean, if we look at it, 29 points for them and Odd. Normally that's enough to keep you up anyway, or just like one more win's needed. I think both them sides will get in the mid to late 30s eventually. So I think they're fine. So Godset would be the only other side that could get into trouble. You can't, I mean, they're so hard to predict. Anything's possible with them, but they've got a high enough percentage of wins, just 2 draws for them. I always say if you win plenty of games and have a low draw percentage, that helps you out overall. And Godset and HamKam actually this year have been good for that.
Fantastic stuff. That'll do for part 1, I think. Unless there's any other business, Steve, that you want to touch on. But I think we're done for part 1. We're going to talk a little bit about Europe at the start of part 2. Our 2 nations merging, as we have a Europa League starting this week, and European football. But join us in part 2. We're going to switch to Sweden and look at everything that's been going on there. And let's see if Bob Bradley's boys can motor themselves up the table. Join us after this short break.
Well, welcome back to the Nordic Football Podcast. You're with Steve Wiss and Jonathan Faduba. Going to talk about the Allsvenskan title race and relegation battle very soon. But before that, your Europa League draw. I was moaning in the Champions League qualifiers how we didn't get Molde against Häcken. But now they are drawn together in Europa League group stage alongside Bayer Leverkusen and Karabag, which I suppose is the second best thing, isn't it, really? I mean, the chances of this happening were remarkably low, actually, I think. Sensational stuff from UEFA. What were your thoughts when you saw the result of this? I mean, I was actually watching the Conference League and the Europa League draw, and they confused the hell out of me, like, genuinely. Sometimes it's like there's only one option for teams to go in whatever group and that, and then I suddenly say, hold on a minute, Molde and Häcken are drawn together. Happy days.
Yeah, welcome back. And you know what, Steve? I didn't actually realise we haven't done an episode since the Häcken Aberdeen game. So I need to talk about that game because I know it's a little bit in the past now. But that was a stunning game of football. It was one of the best games I've seen this season.
Agreed.
And yeah, together at last, Molde and Häcken. I mean, who would have thought it after they, like you said, you know, Klaksvik destroyed that dream. But they wouldn't destroy destiny. So it seems like it was meant to be for these 2 teams. They go into a group with Bayer Leverkusen and Karabag. Häcken play Leverkusen away this week, which is going to be a massive game, to be honest, and a really tough one. I think a really nice reward for the whole club, really playing such a big team in Germany. I think that's obviously the key tie. Qualification is probably going to come down to, you know, who does better against Karabag and who does better against between Häcken and Molde, isn't it? So those Häcken Molde games are going to be really important. But I just wanted to quickly talk about the Häcken Aberdeen game because I have to say, like I said, it was one of the best games I've seen. And Ibrahim Sadiq, you know, capped off his time at BK Häcken with a sensational performance. It was on TV on BBC Scotland. I watched it live on HD and it was amazing. And yeah, it was. The commentator described it as one of the best individual performances you'll see at Potodri this season from Sadiq. He was sensational. He won a penalty. He bagged a couple of goals. Sensational strike, and really earned his move to AZ Alkmaar. And it was really emotional because at the end of the game, he gave a sort of a tearful interview where he was up on the verge of tears, saying that that's his last game for Häcken and he'd done the job that he wanted to do, which was getting them into the Europa League. And honestly, like the Aberdeen like media and the BBC Scotland were raving about him at the end. I mean, they were talking about him like they were calling it like the steal of the century, basically, getting him for 3 million. They couldn't believe that he'd gone for 3 million euros, basically. Like they were stunned. And I did actually think it was a bit of a, I think one of the commentators said if the deal isn't done yet, just rip it up now because you could get probably an extra 5-6 million for him off the back of that game alone. But yeah, it was a really nice night of football. Actually, that I really enjoyed.
It was brilliant, wasn't it? I really enjoyed that game. It was the atmosphere was great. I mean, I quite like Aberdeen as a club anyway. Their fans are quite passionate, aren't they? And they get stuck in. It was the commentators were quite good that game as well. If you're watching over in the UK, really good. They were really good comms, weren't they? And yeah, it was two teams who just went man for man, hammer to hammer, to try and outscore the other. And I mean, there was that massive miss, wasn't they? 1-on-1.
Yeah, Hurstich missed it was like the miss of the set. I mean, it had a lot of things. It had a miss of the century. It had like two of the best goals you'll see. It had everything.
VAR overturns. I mean, the referee had a shocking game on the field himself. But it's interesting that a World Cup referee, it was a German World Cup referee, no hesitation that his own official team called him upon his mistakes, unlike over in the Premier League, where I think refs look out for refs. So it was a good game, really good game. And yeah, I think, fair play for Häcken to making it through to this group.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was Sadiq's probably arguably his best game for the club. I think I tweeted at the time. And yeah, really, I mean, it was 19,000 fans there. And like you said, Aberdeen, I've never been there before, but I mean, they've got a soft spot in March just because of the Ferguson years and what he did there with them. That's one of the best fairy tales in football history, in my opinion. Taking Aberdeen, conquering the Old Firm, and then winning the Cup Winners' Cup. I mean, imagine Aberdeen winning the Europa League.
They're the last team to win the title outside the Old Firm, I think.
So. Yeah, and they beat Real Madrid in the final. Cup Winners' Cup final, which is incredible. I was watching a documentary about that the other day, and Aberdeen is a bit of a storied club, but. Moving on, massive coup for Häcken. They're going to get a lot of money from it. It's the first ever European campaign. They're going to be buzzing for that. How it's going to affect the title, we'll talk about in a minute. We talked about the transfer window. They've lost some key names, and Traore and Sadiq leaving is quite a big pill for them to swallow, to be honest. Because Sadiq carried the mantle really, and in that game he summed it up. I mean, he really, Steve. Sometimes you get performances from a player where it's like they just take the scruff. I love watching games where a player just takes the game by the scruff of the neck and just says, "This is my match." Do you know what I mean? And he did that in that match, and he didn't single-handedly drag them through because I thought the midfield, Rigard, Gustafsson in particular, and Romeo, they dominated that Aberdeen midfield, and that's really where the game was won in the midfield. But Sadiq was just the icing on the cake. He was incredible. But yeah, looking forward to this set of games actually, and Häcken fully deserve their place in this tournament.
Yeah, and I mean, this group for me, I'll give a prediction here. Really, Bayer Leverkusen should probably win all their 6 group games. I think they're a very, very good team. I've even heard some people suggest that they are the second best team in Germany right now on ratings and things like that. So this is going to be a really tough test for both Häcken and Molde and Karabag. Second spot's bang up for grabs. I guess maybe the bias side in me will predict Molde in second place. But, Karabag's a tough place to go, isn't it? The old proverbial tough place to go. It's interesting. The Molde-Häcken games are back-to-back, round number 3 and round number 4. And in between that, Häcken actually have to face Molde in the league. So, mad period that for Häcken. But who do you see finishing second in this group, presuming you also agree with me on Leverkusen winning it?
Do you know what? I think Karabag can't be underestimated. So I think figuring out. I think Karabag Molde is a big game this week, just figuring out their level. But I think Häcken will give Molde a game. I'm a little bit. I mean, we're going to talk about it in a minute now. I think we should probably move on to Allsvenskan, but I'm a little bit down on Häcken at the moment. I'm not sure how big an impact it is going to be losing Sadiq and Traore. This is basically a different team to the team that won the league and started the season. It's had to regenerate itself up front, and I'm not quite sure how good they are yet at the moment. So just want to touch on that as well. Just saying, I think we sent a tweet which was quite popular about Sadiq and Traore. They're legends of the club basically now. Their place in the history of the club's secured for what they've done at the club, getting there. But I think we'll learn a lot. But I'm a bit worried. I'd say I would if Häcken had their full strength team from the start of this season. I think they'll beat Molde, arguably in both legs. But I'm just a little bit worried now about the transition. So I'm going to say Häcken, but I think that's more of a heart thing than a head thing.
Yeah, I think there's a case for all three, really, teams to. And you never know. Leverkusen might have a drop in points somewhere, which that could be crucial for one of these teams that finishes second. We look forward to that group anyway. We're going to move on to this title race. Andrew Potter asked a very good question. I'm a bit disappointed how it's gone for them recently, actually. What happened with Elfsborg yesterday? Title chances now, ? About Elfsborg.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, what did happen to them? Hard to say, really. They've collapsed. I mean, they've lost 2 games now in a row. They are starting to struggle. A massive surprise, this 3-0 defeat to Kalmar at home. And if there's one team that you normally can rely on defensively this season, I think in Allsvenskan, it's probably Elfsborg. So to see them sort of get dismantled, really, is quite stunning. Looking at the kind of underlying numbers, didn't really sort of do any better for Elfsborg. Their expected goals of 1.03 versus 1.63 for Kalmar. That's according to our partners Y-Scout. Elfsborg only have 5 shots on target in the whole game to Kalmar's 8. Possession-wise, they edged it slightly, but didn't really do much with the ball. Even in terms of passes, to be honest, they had the better of the passes, 405 passes completed, but Kalmar managed 379 completed. So you can kind of, and they had a better pass completion accuracy. So you get the sense that Kalmar are a little bit more organized. They were sharper, and they were just a better side. I didn't see the game myself, I'll be honest, but there's something going on at Elfsborg at the moment. Like I say, 2 back-to-back defeats, which is really what you don't need at this time of the season. And they've lost actually 3 of their last 5 because they also lost to Hammarby back in August. So they've only won 2 of their last 5 games, and both of those were at home to Norrköping and Malmö. So yeah, real wobble. I think if I had to put my finger on it, Steve, the one thing I would say is I feel like they've been hampered by the transfer business. We talked about, you talked about teams who've come out of the window well and come out of the window poorly. I think Elfsborg have been battered in the transfer window, to be honest. Injury to Valdemarsen hasn't helped. Their goalkeeper, of course, so he didn't play. I think he was suspended as well in a recent match as well. Then they basically the whole spine of team's been affected, Steve. Odrejka, they managed to keep rolling without him. Jeppe Ockels took over the mantle there. But then in the spine of the team, Lagerbilk moving to Celtic, that's not helped them at the back. He was a key pillar of that centre-back partnership. They brought in Buhari. He scored an own goal against Kalmar, and he's looked a little bit ropey. He's actually from a team that I remember you, Steve, during the pandemic, being on Football Manager, Plateau United. Buhari, he's signed from Plateau United in Nigerian. But yeah, he scored an own goal. He's not, it's going to take him time to settle in. It's almost an impossible ask with 10 games to go to come in and, in your first season, really, of first-team football, replace someone like Lagerbilk, who was such an important player. In midfield, of course, losing Roma hasn't helped. They've brought in Balderson, who looks like a good player, but it's just a lot of it's just a big reshuffle of the team they don't need at this time when you're going for the title. And although I think they've sort of recruited quite intelligently, you still need time to bed in and settle down. And when you're trying to do that and win a title for the first time in however many years it is against the Malmö and the Häcken side, who are both got really big advantages, Steve. Häcken have won the title last season, and Malmö don't have any European football, and they're kind of, they're Malmö. So you don't really have much leeway to sort of make mistakes. I just think losing those players, economic reality has kind of started to dominate, what they can do on the pitch. And it's a tough balance because you get to the summer, people start to try and steal your players. You can't do much financially because you have to take the money on offer. Celtic offered, I think, 3 million euros for Elfsborg. That's a lot of money. You can't really turn it down. But at the same time, if you're going for the title during that period, the transfer window is really harsh on teams in Scandinavia, to be honest, because of where it is in the season. It really can punish the smaller teams, I think. And if you were sort of looking at why aren't there more maybe smaller teams winning titles, you would have to point to that as well, because it really does hamper those teams, in my opinion. And I think that's where Elfsborg have fallen away. I'm not saying they're out of it yet. I still think they've got a chance, but it's not. I'd say their chances, percentage-wise, are going down.
It's very worrying for them. They haven't scored a goal in 3 of their last 5 games. I think the writing was starting. There was a couple of results I was worried about them a month or so ago. And they only just scraped past the likes of, I think, Sirius, it was 1-0. They lost at Varnamo just before the international break. More on Varnamo in a minute. That's not as bad a result as it looks. But to lose at home to Kalmar 3-0, and Kalmar have not been the freest scoring team this year. They've been quite a low-scoring side. And I think even their most diehard supporters would admit that they're just bang average, really, this season. So, good performance from Kalmar, definitely. You're right. The first goal, I think, was a goalkeeping, not mistake, but I think Vladimirsson probably would have prevented the ball being gone into the striker's path. And, they've got to pick themselves up, Elfsborg. They do have some favourable fixtures, I looked. But it's tricky for them. Malmö are top of the table. You're right, they don't have any European football now. 49 points for them, 48 for Elfsborg, 47 for Häcken, who had a come-from-behind victory for them. Malmö, their form it hasn't been amazing, but that is a good win for them away against Hammarby, 3-1. Oliver Berg on the score sheet again. He already looks like an inspired piece of business in this window. He might just be the missing piece that they want, the type of player that really suits this Henrik Rydström style.
Yeah, it's an interesting signing and quite a controversial one, but it could end up being a masterstroke. And who knows, it might actually end up winning Malmö the league. Rydström bringing in a player he knows. Of course, they were together at Kalmar and they were a bit of a dream team there. He was like the key man at Kalmar under Rydström, knows him inside out. Obviously, there's that whole tapping up controversy with Diff. It didn't really work out for him at Djurgården. I saw a question they put to him the other day. And, why is he already doing better at Malmö than he did in the whole time at Djurgården? The simple answer was he's around better players. A little bit of a dig at Djurgården, I think, but it's also the stylistic fit. Like I said, when it happened, Djurgården just didn't really find a place for him, I don't think. I think they wanted to play strikers and they also wanted to play Berg as a false nine, and you can't really do both. So I feel like it never quite... They did get rid of their strikers in the end, Djurgården, ironically. They got rid of Edvardsson, they got rid of Bergström. I know they brought in a couple other ones, but they got rid of some strikers, but then they also got rid of Berg, so they kind of threw the baby out with the bathwater. But yeah, I think, it's a massive win at Hammarby. Malmö seemed to maybe that international break, I think it might have helped them. I know obviously they'll have a few away on international duty, but it just seems like they've been wobbling themselves, Malmö, don't forget. They haven't exactly been doing amazing lately. But they've recovered with that win at Hammarby. And, listen, Hammarby aren't amazing. Going back to Elfsborg, Jimmy Tellin came out afterwards and said this is rock bottom for us after that defeat. And he did actually make 4 substitutions at halftime. He was so annoyed about it. And, we're going to see basically how he changes things in the weeks to come, because obviously, clearly, we're not happy with half the team. So it's a big challenge for him. There's a lot of talk at the moment, Steve, by the way, just on an off topic, about who will be the next Sweden manager, because Sweden's place at the Euros is looking in real jeopardy. And there's rumours Jan Andersson might be replaced, and Tellin's actually one of the emerging contenders to be the next Sweden manager. So, I think a lot of people are going to be looking at him in the next few months to see how he deals with this title race. He's clearly not happy. But yeah, I think with Malmö, maybe that international break is going to have given them a little bit of what they needed, just some time to train, bed in the new players. They've had a lot, like us, they've sort of gone through what Elfsborg have gone through, but they've gone through it about 2 months earlier, with the likes of Hugo Larsson leaving, bringing in Rosengren, who scored, by the way, a really good goal, his first goal for Malmö in that Hammarby win. Having to bring in, they brought in like the likes of Jorgensen, Pontus Jansson. Of course, Malmö have had a lot of rejuvenation as well, and they had a similar issue with some poor results. But this might be the trigger now that keeps them sort of, maybe they can go from here and get some momentum. Funnily enough, Pontus Jansson came out and said that Henrik Rydström went with a really attacking lineup, and he said it was a brave 11 with no handbrake on it. So I think there was a little bit of surprise in the dressing room when they saw the starting lineup because it really was almost all out attack, to be honest. They had Vecchia, they had Taha Ali, they had Nanasi, they had Kisa Tellin, they had pretty much every forward player they could field. Reenstrom went with sort of 3 centre backs, and then almost every other player was offensive, really. So a brave 11, and it's paid off. And listen, the one thing about Malmö, I think, once they get some momentum with no European football, they've already got that nous and that know-how. I mean, Reenstrom hasn't won a title, but he seems to sort of know how to win games. So this could be the week that maybe they got everything into gear.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the fixtures, and this is when you do really have to look at fixtures. There's only 7 rounds left in Sweden. Malmö's last 2 matches are away at Häcken and at home to Elfsborg. But will there be away and clear by then? Because, I mean, just looking at their next 4, they've got Degerfors, Brommapoik, and a Kalmar and Varberg. I struggle to see how they're dropping points in those 4 fixtures, Jonathan. So, with full focus on the league, I certainly think it's in their hands, no doubt about it whatsoever. The rest of them have just somehow got to keep pace with Malmö before those last 2 crunch fixtures. If they're still in the title race, then anything could happen. But I think Häcken and both Elfsborg and Häcken would probably want to be facing Malmö sooner rather than later. It just might be too late by the time round 29 and round 30 come.
Could possibly be.
So that's the way I would say that. Just a word on Häcken again, though. I mean, they beat Halmstad 3-2. Second time in home games recently where they basically snatched victory from the jaws of defeat. Very similar match against Sirius. I mean, they should be beating those sides at home comfortably without any dramas. But I suppose fair play. They've come back again. They've got great heart. And they've always got goals in them, Häcken. They've got an amazing home record, 11 out of 12 home wins. They've won the title recently. There's something about this squad. You can never write them off, can you?
No, and I think that's actually one thing that they don't get praised enough for. Their resilience. They're actually a really resilient team. They've won a lot of games late on this season. Just off the top of my head, I'm trying to think of a few, but they've done it again against Halmstad. Although you might ask the question why they lose in those games in the first place, why they're behind, but they have scored a lot of late goals, I think. So just looking at sort of recent games, that game against Halmstad, obviously they've won that in the 90th minute with Hovland's goal. They were 2-1 down. Obviously they were comfortable first half, but then went 2-1 down early in the second half. Managed to come back. I'm just thinking of, for example, the Sirius game before that, with the famous rant, obviously, about Sirius on the last show. That was the 90th minute winner, even though it was an own goal. Varberg boys, they were 1-0 up and got a late goal in the 86th minute to sort of secure the win. Don't forget, for example, beating Elfsborg with 10 men, coming from 1-0 down. So they've shown a lot of resilience. Brommapoik in the game in July, Steve, when Launi scored 2 in the 90th minute. After they were pegged back to 2-2, sorry. They were 2-0 up, went 2-2, and then got 2 in the last minutes. So, yeah, it depends how you want to sort of take that. I can even go back to the 8th of July. Sadiq goal in the 75th minute at AIK when they were 1-0 down, came back to win. So there's been loads of games they've come back to win from behind, and loads of games that they won late. Sometimes I think to myself, is that a good sign or a bad sign? Because sometimes you think, well, a good team eventually might get caught out by that. But I think they are pretty well equipped to deal with the title race. It's just the fact that I'm still not sure about, for example, Herstich and Launi. They're not as effective as Traore and Sadiq. There's no doubt about that in my mind. Maybe they can sort of still win a title, but they've lost 2 massive talismen. Even Yeremiev, I don't think Herstich is the level of, for example, Yeremiev, who scored all those goals to win the title. Definitely not yet, anyway. So it's going to be on players like Rigor maybe to sort of pull them over the line. Don't forget they've also lost other players. Lund's gone to Italy. They lost their first choice left back, which we didn't talk about much really in the transfer window. We've lost a couple of other defenders who have gone, like I mentioned, Uchenna in part 1 of the show. Okay, he wasn't a regular, but he still got games every now and then. So they've lost a lot of players, but yeah, they do have that resilience. I think they're not as good as they were last season going into the final 7 games. Last season they were really flying. They were taking on everyone in all cylinders. I just don't think they're at that level yet. Will they pick it up again? It's going to depend on Launi. and Hurstich. One thing I noticed about Launi, Steve, I feel like he gets the ball too deep and too wide. Every time he gets the ball, it's like he has to beat like 4 men or something.
He's a frustrating player, isn't he? I've said this before.
I'm not sure if
he does have some very good games,
his fault. I don't know if it's his fault. Like either he's being given an instruction or he's just not that kind of player. But he's not as like cut and thrust as Sadiq, where he doesn't seem to be receiving the ball in the same positions. It's like he's receiving a lot deeper, so he's a lot more disconnected from the front forward line. Sonko is a really young player. He's only 18, 19, on the left side, so he's really inexperienced. Yeah, I'd agree with you when you say that Malmö probably. I mean, I've always had Malmö as my favourites to win the league this year. I think the momentum is gradually swinging towards Malmö. I mean, you look at that squad, Steve. It's just packed full of good players now, really. And I guess the one thing is going to be, can they juggle it and get the balance right? Because every week they're going to have to leave a couple of good players out. But yeah, the momentum's probably in their favour, especially with Europe to consider for Häcken.
Yeah, it does look quite good for Malmö in that title race, but it is still close in the points, so anything can happen. We're going to talk about the relegation battle in a minute, but one question before then from Lewis Dalmeida. Thanks very much for your question here, Lewis. I presume this is a bit of a mistype or something. Can Varnamo win the whole thing? But he's more on about the best coach team in the league by miles. Varnamo, again, another great win against Djurgården. They have this knack of doing really well against the big teams. Saw Thomas Frank on Monday Night Football tonight on Sky, and Brentford do really well against big teams. Varnamo remind me a bit of Brentford in a way. They're so hard, aren't they, to face, especially as an underdog.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic comparison, actually. I think they are the Brentford of Sweden. Maybe not in terms of their transfer business. They're very creative in the market, but they don't do that kind of Moneyball type system that Matthew Benham and everyone at Brentford does. But they're certainly, in terms of their structure, the way they play, they're the most tactically innovative, I think. We've had David Salini on the podcast, and of course the assistant manager there, and of course he's pretty open on Twitter. He posts like training sessions. He posts full clips of their training sessions, and you can see what they work on every week. And he's really like open and transparent with it. And they're really it's really exciting watching those clips. You can really see the work they put into training and trying to create different ways of being clever in different situations. And yeah, they're punching above their weights. They're a team that the big boys tend to struggle against, just like Brentford. I watched that as well, actually, Monday Night Football, and Thomas Frank, talked about how they've done the double over Man City last season. Of course, they beat Liverpool. I always find it quite funny on Monday Night Football, Steve. I feel like sometimes is Jamie Carragher is he like a plant? Is he like a Liverpool plant on that show? Because he always asks questions about Liverpool, like tactically. Yeah, I saw him asking about Brentford. What did you do tactically? And then he did the same thing, didn't he, for someone else on the show? I can't remember who it was. He always seems to ask questions about Liverpool, like, how did you play against Liverpool? Like, so I feel like there's a bit of a dodgy industry plant going on there. But anyway, that's my conspiracy theory. But yeah, like I would say Varnamo are a similar team. Look at that win against Djurgården this week. I know Djurgården, they were struck down with illness, so obviously quite a few players missed the game. Danielson missed the match. A few others missed it, so they were missing some key players actually. Diff, but brilliant first goal in that match for Varnamo, and they've got some really good players. They're not that consistent. Sometimes they're a bit of an unpredictable side. I mean, the question is, can they win the league? Well, I mean, mathematically, yes, but they're 17 points behind Malmö, so they're going to need to. It's going to be the greatest end to a season in history if they did manage to win it. But yeah, I don't think that's quite going to happen. But they certainly, I think, will stay up. No troubles there, and that in itself is a bit like Brentford. I don't think what I thought was interesting with Thomas Frank, Steve, is he talked about expectations and how the expectations always go up, but people, I think fans and everyone just always sometimes forget, don't they? Like Brentford shouldn't even really be in the Premier League, let alone.
Yeah.
They were asking him, can he get top 8 and stuff like this? And it's like sometimes you need a bit of a reality check to just realize where you are. And for Varnamo, avoiding relegation is like that's where they should be. They've got the lowest budget in the league by miles, I think, as of last season. I don't know if they had any injections of cash, but they're by miles one of the smallest budgets. So for them to even be kind of anywhere near mid-table is a massive coup for them and a testament to everyone at the club. So, yeah, I actually got a theory that we turned Lewis de Almeida into a Varnamo fan from that podcast with David Salini, because I remember him saying after that show that he he didn't really know much about Viking, and he's become a sort of mini fan of theirs. So I feel like we can take a bit of credit there, Steve, for the Viking I love. But yeah, really well run club, and long may it continue for them, because they, I think this summer, Steve, that I think their manager's going to have a lot of interest from bigger clubs in Sweden. So there's rumours they already turned down EFK. Let's see if there's any other teams that maybe fancy them in the summer, but in the winter, sorry. But for now, Viking fans will be enjoying that ride.
Done brilliantly. I have to give them a lot of credit, and they're going to be safe this season, no doubt about it at all. I know we haven't got long left here, but relegation battle is getting really close there. The big boys, IKOR and EFK Göteborg, have been in better form recently, especially EFK, but far from safe still, because Degerfors keep getting the odd win. Sirius with a 7-0 win. I think they might have been listening to the Nordic Football Podcast, because they were a lot more clinical in this game. Varberg, absolutely horrendous. I'm sure you might slag them off here for about half a minute, Jonathan. Bromma Poikin are getting sucked into trouble as well. 7-0 win for Sirius. Let's give them their moment in the sun before we sign off this episode.
Yeah, we should praise them, obviously, after slamming them on the last show. But that's what they can do, Stephen. That's why I've slammed them. I don't do this just randomly. Like, there's a reason.
You knew it was there. You knew
they've got the ability, Steve. They're a good footballing side. Like, listen. You like teams that attack. You mentioned it in part one. You like teams that play attacking football. Sirius try and play the right way. They try and go about things in the right way. And to a certain extent, Steve, it would be a travesty if they went down. And I think that's what my rant was a little bit about. It's like, they do try and play the right way. I mean, they've scored more goals than Hammarby. They've scored more goals than Djurgården. All right, 7 of them were at the weekend, but they've scored more goals than like most of the top teams in the league, really. So they're one of the top scorers in the league. They've got decent XG as well, but like I said, they kind of fall asleep late in games, and that's what's cost them. I guess the best way to counter that, Steve, is score 5 goals in the first half in every match, and then it doesn't matter if you can see 2 in the last minute of every game, because you'll be fine. But yeah, to sort of cap it off, I mean, let's not get carried away here. They are in the relegation playoff still, and that just sums it up. The fact that they can win 7-0 and it only takes them into the relegation playoff, and they're still a massive outsider now to sort of survive. You look at AIK now, 2 points ahead of them. EFK Göteborg has really picked up form. I need to briefly mention them as well. Bromma Poikin are maybe getting sucked into it, but apart from that, Sirius in a massive battle now, and it's all of their own doing, Steve. I mean, that win, if you look at the goal difference between Degerfors and Sirius, minus 26 points, minus 26 goal difference better, Sirius to Degerfors. That just tells you everything you need to know about this team. Shouldn't be anywhere near the relegation battle, in my opinion, in terms of the sort of style of football they play, but they lack concentration at key moments, and that's what's cost them. On the side of Varberg, it was really alarming. It's almost like they gave up at 2-0. They had a huddle at 2-0 down. I'm pretty sure it was 2-0. It was either 2-0 or 3-0 down. When you see a team huddle, Steve, a team's in trouble basically. If they're sort of 2-0, 3-0 down, and you get a team huddle, it's like they've not spoken all week. Do you know what I mean? And it's like they've been in the changing rooms and not spoken, and they suddenly decide like midway through a game, like, let's try and communicate. For me, it's always a massive red flag of a team that's just basically packed it in. Almost tried to rally themselves, but they still couldn't rally themselves beyond conceding 4 more goals. So took an absolute pepper in. They're a bit like Allsvenskan for me. I think in Norway, they're down, and it's now just about saving face. It's almost like the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, that meme. Last one out of the room, turn out the lights. Basically, I feel like they've nearly packed in for the season. But then again, they had a massive win against Varberg the week before that, 4-3. That was a huge game. So you never know. They've sucked Varberg they've sucked Bromma Poikin into it with that win. I'll talk about EFK just quickly. I think with Macholi and Santos, they're doing really well. And
signed well, haven't they?
They've signed well, and it looks like Jens Bertolascu, former podcast, is slowly turning things around there. You just mentioned as well, AIK beating Degerfors. They weren't amazing AIK, but they got the win, vital win. So we have to praise Sirius, but they're not out of it, Stephen. They've got some tough games coming.
No, they're not. They're not at all. Varberg, they could lose every game. That's the sort of result that just completely deflates a side. And it's interesting. I won't actually ask you for a prediction, about who goes down. But who do you hope is the second team that goes down?
Oof, that's almost worse than asking me to predict it.
I'm naughty, aren't I? I am naughty, Jonathan.
That is cheeky.
While you think about that, I just want to have a brief, before we sign off, I saw highlights from a Superettan game tonight. It was Oster, who were in the promotion mixer against Västerås. Massive game at the top. The goalkeeper, Miljo Prekovic, scored a 96-minute equaliser with a brilliant header from a corner to keep. That's a big point for Oster. Might well keep them in the automatic promotion race. Upsiken, Västerås, and Oster in the top 3 spots of Superettan right now. Gais, we could see the return of Gais in Allsvenskan next season, Jonathan. And almost certainly one of them will be replacing Varberg. And the second team to go down, who do you hope?
Well, isn't it amazing, Steve, how sometimes relegation can just reawaken the whole club? I mean, guys have just been tinkering around. Guys have been tinkering around Superettan for the whole time we've done this podcast and never been anywhere near promotion, I don't think. Get relegated, and now they're on the brink of back-to-back promotions, which is exactly what Roma Poikina did when they went down to the 3rd division. So it's crazy, isn't it, sometimes, how relegation can rejuvenate a team. As a Leeds fan, I'm sure you'll agree.
It happens, mate. Look at Ipswich Town as well, by the way, recently. Listen, I'm not going to say I want a team to go down because there's no teams that I dislike. So it's not like any listeners will know I don't just rant for the sake of it because I don't like a team. It's usually with an intention behind it. Ironically, I think my 3 biggest rants of the season have been Sirius, Degerfors, and Varberg. Yeah. And I don't actually really want any of them to go down, to be honest. Degerfors have started to turn it around a little bit. They look a little bit more tight defensively. I don't actually want any of those 3 to go down. I'll be honest. I mean, Varberg, I don't care if they go down, actually. I feel like they've run out of steam and it's time for them to go. It is, yeah.
To be honest.
Yeah.
They maybe could benefit from rejuvenating, getting rid of maybe some of those 45 players on their books and sort of just, starting to kind of act like a normal club. Obviously, the manager's gone now, so, I don't know if he was part of that whole shenanigans. But
you still haven't forgiven them for having to update your spreadsheets with 50 players.
Yeah, I do.
Broma Poikina, are they in trouble?
I do worry about Broma Poikina. I think they've got a tough run, actually, Steve. They've still got to play Malmö away. They've still got to play Djurgården, Elfsborg, Häcken. They've got Sirius away, and they've got Mjällby away. So I don't think Broma Poikina are actually out of it, to be honest. So they could get suckered into it. So I'm going to do what I usually do, Steve, and sit on the fence for another week or 2. But one thing I'll say is it's looking good for EF Core and AIK. I think they'll just about have enough to stay up.
I still think Halmstad are not 100% safe, and if they were lucky to beat Sirius. If they'd not had that win, I think they'd be massively in trouble. But I mean, they should have enough now. But I'm still keeping my eye on them in case they have a shocking end to the season. That will do for this episode. It's been great with you, Jonathan. Thank you very much for your support, everyone. Remember, you can check us out on the socials at Nordic Footpod, at Meatman Soccer, at JF Football. Do check out that Y-Scout blog, like I said, on Tromso. And we look forward to a very exciting period of games before the next international break. It's really hotting up domestically and in Europe. So good show as always, mate.
Yeah, and just before we finish, Steve, I'll tell you one team who aren't going to go down. And that is Mjällby. What an incredible season they're having. 2-0 winners away to Norrköping tonight. Anders Torstensson, the military mastermind, is having a fantastic season. They've been brilliant. I mean, for them to be where they are in the table, Steve, they're currently 7th. They're only a couple of points off 5th. What a season they're having. So, yeah, I've got to give a shout out to Mjällby because we haven't talked about them too much this season. But, yeah, that'll be it. And so it's great to see you again. And we'll see you again very soon.
We certainly will. Yeah, take care, everyone. We will see you next time. Goodbye and take care for now.